We have quorum, Sonia?
If 9 to quorum, yes.
Okay. I think we're waiting for our chair.
He's here.
I'm counting 19 commissioners.
Yeah, a few more added. Yes, we have a quorum then. I see Wendy on. I didn't count her.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start then. Let's go ahead and start the October 29th, 2021 St. Paul Planning Commission. This meeting is being held remotely. It's not practical nor prudent for the commission. If someone could please mute themselves, so everybody make sure that you're muted. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay. So this meeting is being held remotely as it's not practical nor prudent for the Planning Commission and its committees to meet in person or pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.02. In light of the ongoing pandemic, the Planning Commission will not be present at its regular location, and all members of the Planning Commission will attend this meeting by telephone or other electronic means. So we will begin today's meeting by having a roll call. Sonia, could we do attendance today? Commissioner Yang, if you could please mute yourself.
Can everyone mute their microphones, please? There's interception and noise. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner DeJoy.
Here.
Commissioner Grill.
Here.
Commissioner Holt.
Here.
Commissioner Hood.
Here.
Commissioner Katner.
Here.
Commissioner McMurtry.
Here.
Commissioner Moore.
Here.
Commissioner Presley. Commissioner Riley.
Here.
Commissioner Risberg.
Here.
Commissioner Saeed.
Here.
Commissioner Taglia.
Here.
Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Yang.
Here.
And Sonia, Commissioner Underwood is here.
Yeah, I saw your name. I just didn't hear you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, the chair, Rango Morales.
Present.
Commissioner Mitchell is here too.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the first item on the agenda. I'm seeing that it's Communications and Nominations Committee. Luis, is that just listed because you guys just met from 8 to 8:30 this morning, or is that intended to be the first item?
No, that we just did meet. I don't know if Commissioner Underwood has any report, or we can save that for later in the meeting.
Commissioner Underwood, is that okay? We do a report later.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the next, I don't have any announcements, so I'll move on to Director Pededa for his announcements.
Chair, I don't have any announcements this morning, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to what I assume a lot of people are here for today, which is the public hearing. Notice of the public hearing. Well, today the City of St. Paul Planning Commission is holding a public hearing on the religious accessory uses zoning study. Notice of the public hearing was published in the Legal Ledger on Monday, October 7th, 2021, and was sent to the citywide early notification system, list of recipients, and other interested parties. So something different, well, prior to taking testimony on this proposed text amendment to the zoning code, I would just like to notify the commission as well as members of the public here to testify during the public hearing that the draft standard proposed under section A of the draft, which reads, quote, A, no building additions or new buildings may be constructed for the primary purpose of conducting a religious institution accessory use, that this item will no longer be recommended by staff following the public hearing. This standard from the amendment is based upon advice. This removal of the amendment of the standard from the amendment is based upon advice from the city attorney's office and discussion with staff. The commission can take testimony on this proposed amendment today, but I and staff want to make it clear to the commission and to individuals here that are coming to testify on this, that this part of the proposal will be withdrawn from the final draft to be considered by the planning commission at a future date. So staff will be giving a presentation briefly on the religious accessory uses zoning study and be willing to answer any questions by the commissioners on this issue, as well as any other questions that the commission has regarding the zoning study. So I will now turn over to staff, and I believe it's Mr. Dermody.
Thank you, Chair and Planning Commissioners, members of the public. First off, I'll just ask Luis. I'm a guest. I got demoted to a guest, so I can't share my screen. I just emailed you a document. If you could put it up on the screen when you're able to. It'll take me a little while to get to that point anyway. I'd appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Dermody. I'm a planner with the City of St. Paul. On the table today for public comment is a set of draft zoning code amendments to define religious institution accessory uses and to create associated standards. We've heard and read a lot of comments already at the staff level from folks. Thank you for those. With many people wondering why the city is regulating these uses at all, that is a good question, which might be helpful to address at the outset of the hearing. So I'll do that now before I get into the specifics of the proposal. So why is something being proposed at all? The short answer is that it's required by a court order, but there's more to it. So I'll explain. Many cities across the United States define a church or religious institution in their zoning code, but do not specify the allowable accessory uses. That doesn't mean accessory uses aren't regulated in those cities. It just means they're not spelled out in the code. I have some personal experience with that working for another city where a church wanted to add a community center to their campus with a gymnasium and study areas, etc. They had to get a rezoning to allow it, and you wouldn't find that requirement spelled out anywhere in that city's code. Zoning administrators across the country make similar one-off case-by-case decisions when faced with such gray area requests about what constitutes a church, in residential zoning districts especially, even if those details aren't spelled out exactly in the code. Here in St. Paul, we have a different history with these uses that forces a different approach. When faced with one of those case-by-case decisions in 2004, our zoning administrator determined that a variety of uses requested for a church campus in Merriam Park, including preschool, yoga classes, a travel agency, and massage therapy, were not allowed under the zoning code unless the Planning Commission took a specific action to find them similar to uses allowed in the code. So the Planning Commission did that. They approved what's called a determination of similar use application that found the requested uses were indeed similar to a home occupation, which is allowed in residential zoning, and made it subject to the same conditions that home occupations are subject to. Some of those conditions, as you might imagine, are imperfect fits for uses like preschools, yoga classes, or community services, such as a 1-to-1 ratio for teachers to students, or very minimal traffic generation, whatever exactly that means. That 2004 decision has been repeated administratively ever since, with no public notice required, for any gray area accessory uses requested at a religious institution. A few years ago, in 2017, the problems with the city's process came to a head with a request to allow a social services organization to serve over 100 people per day using the entire lower floor of a church in Dayton's Bluff. It was approved administratively. The lack of public process for our approvals meant that there was no process for neighbors to appeal the zoning administrator's decision that the use was similar to a home occupation. To fix that due process issue, the neighbors were allowed belatedly to appeal after construction had already occurred to build out the interior. Eventually, the situation ended up in court, and a settlement confirmed that the use was allowed there. The settlement also required the zoning study we will hear public comment on today. So we have a historical practice to remedy and a court order to fulfill. So that's why we're doing it. And leaving things alone is not really an option here in St. Paul due to our specific history. So let's review the proposal on the table. And it looks like I have the power to actually share my screen now, so I will do that.
Yeah, it's up as well, Bill. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, did you put it up? Thank you. There it is. So, by some measures, the proposal on your screen would be the most explicitly permissive zoning code treatment of religious accessory uses that I am aware of. Uses that might require rezonings in other cities would be explicitly allowed here, including overnight shelter, social services, community centers, performance spaces, and reception halls.
Here's somebody talking in favor of the thing.
None of these uses is allowed in a residential zoning district according to the code today. The full list of proposed uses is on the screen. On the other hand, there are also some limitations on the table, which I believe we'll hear a lot of public comment about today, which is very helpful. Those limitations include the one that is struck on your screen and that the chair announced would be struck, that no new building or building additions for the primary purpose of conducting an accessory use. Condition A, that will not be going forward. Also contained within the definitions there, item number 4, emergency housing and overnight shelter is limited to 10 adults plus children in their care. So that's another limitation to be aware of. And the third one, which is condition B on your screen, in residential districts, social and community services over 1,000 square feet require a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission. So 3 main limitations are proposed. One of them is struck, so there are 2 remaining on the table that we welcome comment on. We welcome comment on this entire documented process as well. After today, for everyone's information, the process is that a committee of the Planning Commission will review all of the testimony and make a recommendation to the full Planning Commission on how to proceed. Then the Planning Commission will make its recommendation to the City Council. The City Council will hold its own public hearing in January and make a decision. And due to the court order, this process must be complete by February 1st. With that, I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dermody. I'll now turn it over to commissioners for any questions for Mr. Dermody about the study or about the item that has been crossed out or any other questions. I'm not seeing any questions, so I will go ahead and move on to the public portion of this public hearing portion of today's meeting. Just 1 second here. So before the hearing is open for public, I will now open the floor for commission members to ask. The following rules of procedure will be used in conducting the hearing. All testimony and questions will be addressed to the chair. If you're a member of the public that would like to speak during this public hearing, you will be asked to identify yourself. Speakers should state their name and address for the record before beginning their presentation. All comments must be confined to the topics of the public hearing, which is the proposed religious accessory uses zoning study. Each speaker may speak only once. Again, speakers are requested to address all questions to the chair, and planning commission members may ask questions to the speakers and to staff. You will be limited to no more than 3 minutes. People who exceed the time limit may have their microphones muted by staff. Please mute yourself during this meeting, except during your 3 minutes when you're specifically called upon to speak. When the Planning Commission closes the public hearing and refers the matter to the Comp Plan Committee, and the planning staff will hold the record open for additional written testimony that they received by 4:30 on Monday, November 1st, 2021. If you would like to speak on this item, please identify yourself now by either raising your hand or listing your name on the comments section. I will call on people in the best way that I can by seeing who's put up on the highest on people who raise their hand or people who have noted that they would like to comment on the comment section. Staff will, at the conclusion of the presentation, I will ask 3 times, is there any people to speak in favor? There will be no further testimony. Once there's no additional testimony, there will be a motion that the hearing be closed and taken under advisement by the Planning Commission. So now I will turn it over to any members of the community who would like to provide input today. So if you could raise your hand, and again, just note in the comments, you will have each 3 minutes to speak on whatever you would like for the commission to hear. So I'm seeing I'm going to go ahead and call on Imam Asad Zaman.
Council members, good morning. Thank you very much for taking my testimony. I really appreciate it. I would like to speak out in opposition to this proposed.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you please state your name and
Sure.
address for the record?
Sure. I am Imam Asad Zaman. I am Executive Director of the Muslim American Society of Minnesota. My address of record is 1608 Comm Avenue, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55118.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for hearing my testimony. I'd like to speak out in opposition to this proposed amendment. And the reason for it is actually fairly simple. I represent a minority faith. Most of my fellow imams and mosques are new to the city, and they have not had the decades, and in some cases the half century, to build up a impressive campus with all the accessory services that are being discussed. Yet these services are in desperate need by our community. Our community needs soup kitchens and homeless shelters and battered women's shelters and workforce training centers. And I have to be honest with you, our community receives significant misunderstanding and significant discrimination when we go in front of cities. There is literally a cemetery in our community that has been purchased 6 years ago, and we have not been able to use it even once because city councils and neighbors give us a hard time. So creating a set of regulations that would force us to go in front of and confront angry neighbors, many of whom express Islamophobia, is not at all in our best interest. I am strongly against this. I do not know a single imam who is in support of this proposed amendment. I would urge, if the court is requiring you to clarify accessory uses, clarify them and make it clear that these are all the accessory uses that are permitted for a church to do. The definitions of churches are well established by the Internal Revenue Service. I know because I had to apply for and receive church status for my organization. So I don't see why this is going to be a problem. In conclusion, I strongly oppose the proposed amendment as it stands, and I urge you to instead make an amendment to comply with the court order that would allow all accessory uses for established churches. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I'll turn over to commission members and to see if there's any questions for the speaker. All right, seeing none, I'll move on to the next individual. Mr. Ryan Reckamp.
Yep, Ryan Raycamp, 1639 Grotto Street North, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55117. I'm here on behalf of Lumen Christi Catholic Community at 2055 Boland Avenue. I appreciate item A being struck from the record. That was a primary concern. Our second concern is the definition of childcare being labeled as accessory use. It is my understanding that childcare also would include preschool, so it's part of our educational facility. Currently, our school is at capacity, and we house most of our preschool in our worship space or our church campus, if you will. This change to the amendment then classifies childcare or preschool as an accessory use and not a valid institution of our education policy. It seems to contradict what we're hearing from the city and state that preschool is in fact, part of the education process. So I'm concerned about that change in language. The second piece is the state and city now, or the city now is determining what is religious institutions use and what's a valid ministry. Who gets to determine that going forward? Is it based on consensus of who issues suggested uses, or would this be determined by the courts? And if this in fact will be determined by the courts, my concern is how much time and effort the courts would have to spend going through item by item, determining what is an accessory use and what is an institutional use that is valid and important to the ministry of the church. So I highly encourage the city to re-examine this, to take a step back and work with the houses of worship to come up with an accommodation. More than happy to sit down at the table and figure out what can we do in order to meet the requirements of the court order, but at the same time not inhibit growth and future ministries of our church. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Reckamp. I'll turn over to commissioners to see if there's any questions for the speaker. I'll move on to the next individual, Reverend Carl Johnson.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Carl Johnson from Dayton's Bluff, record of address 781 East 7th Street, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55106. My two concerns. One concern is that you guys created recommendations, it sounds like, without an economical advisory board that will help define some of these accessory things that we are seeing on the board, and also the focus on conditional uses for food pantries within our city. The one thing I do know, because of COVID, churches have been a frontline support for anyone who has been food insecure over these past year and a half. And limiting that and creating a conditional use will also hinder the uses of churches doing that, especially ones who use parking lots and drive-through food pantries to get these conditional uses up and going. And so I just think there was a little premature assumption made, and we would appreciate some.
All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson, or Reverend Johnson. I will go ahead and turn to commissioners to see if there are any questions for the speaker. Seeing none, I'll turn over now to Pastor Joshua Miller.
Thank you. Pastor Joshua Miller, Jehovah Lutheran Church, 1566 Thomas Avenue in St. Paul, 55104. On behalf of both Jehovah Lutheran and the St. Paul Circuit of Churches of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, I also strongly speak against this proposal as exceedingly broad and really as overkill to a problem which could be addressed much more narrowly. My brothers and sisters and I on our circuit see this as a clear overreach and speak against it. In particular, the things that are listed as accessory use as both of as the accessory to our faiths, as to the free exercise of our faith, and so we see this a threat to the free exercise in the city of St. Paul. I do thank the commission for striking Section A. That is helpful. Thank you. If the religious education classes are an accessory use, all of our churches and many others have confirmation or Arabic school or something along those lines, and that is hardly accessory to our existence. It is indeed essential, as is serving our neighbors. I urge the commission to scrap this proposal, to go back to the drawing board and draw up something that does address the court order and the history and the issues, but is not so broad. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I will turn over for commissioners for any questions for the speaker.
Excuse me, Chair Sonia. Pastor Miller, could you please submit some written comment because when you were speaking, you kept blanking out. So I really didn't get the full what you were saying. So if you could send us something in writing, I'd appreciate it and I could get the record right.
So go ahead, Pastor.
We did submit, our group did submit in writing to along with Concordia University St. Paul, we did submit in writing. So I do feel that we are covered there.
So I see Commissioner Grill has a question before calling on her. Because the pastor and another speaker have already raised the issue of preschool services. Just to clarify, Bill, by including child and adult daycare center and education courses or classes, Bill, is the purpose of that to sort of continue to allow those uses within religious institutions without having to go through a more bureaucratic process of trying to establish that?
Chair, commissioners, there are a number of
We came back because we're.
Excuse me, somebody needs to mute, I think. There are a number of uses listed here that I think would be allowed even if they weren't listed here as principal uses. Religious education classes is among those. Other uses on this list may be among those. So those comments are helpful. I'm not sure about each and every use up and down the list, but I think the idea for overlisting here was to, belt and suspenders, make extra sure that it's clear that it's an allowed use. But that's something you may wish to reconsider and evaluate when this comes back through for your recommendation.
So let me just clarify my question, because it appears that the comment was more tailored as to the label of accessory, whereas the intention is that these uses should be almost codified that they are allowed. Is that sort of the intent behind it?
Many of these uses are listed as being allowed with no restrictions. As I mentioned at the top, there are a couple of restrictions proposed. But, for instance, religious education classes, there's no restriction proposed. Counseling, there's no restriction proposed. Community center, there's no restriction proposed. With standard A being eliminated, the only uses on the list that are proposed to have any restrictions would be emergency housing and overnight shelter, or social and community services. Besides that, everything on the list would be treated the same as a principal use. So it's splitting hairs, I think, whether you call it accessory or principal use, either way it's allowed, and just has to meet, typical building safety requirements as is proposed here. That said, um, when this comes back through for your recommendation, you may wish to remove any uses that are in that category that probably should be considered principal uses and are only listed here to make extra clear that they're allowed. You may wish to remove them from this list. Perhaps it's creating more confusion than clarity, which was, I think, the intent at the beginning.
All right, so I'll turn over again to the pastor. Does that address some of your concerns, sir? Or
It did indeed. Thank you. I appreciate that clarity. I apologize for the poor quality of our Wi-Fi signal here.
okay, I see that other commissioners had questions. I saw Commissioner Grill and Commissioner Taggia. Their hands went back down, but I'll call Commissioner Grill.
Yes, this is Commissioner Grell. Sonia clarified what I needed as well. I was hoping for a written version of the comment, so that was all.
All right, and Commissioner Taggia?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify the difference between primary use and accessory use. I wondered whether primary uses are defined in the zoning code already and whether these in any way conflict with those already defined uses.
All right. And I think Bill did sort of address that, but Bill, could you just sort of provide a synopsis to that question?
Sure. I'll just state that we don't have a definition for religious institution in the code. It's listed as a principal use, but there's no definition attached to it. Unlike this list of accessory uses where there is a definition attached to it. So that's something you may also wish to consider. It is within the scope of the study that you initiated. It said any related portions of the zoning code may be addressed, and so you may wish to do that, create a definition of some kind. Most cities don't define religious institution or church, some do, but that is something within your purview that you could do.
Any additional questions for staff or the pastor before moving on? Seeing none, I'll call on the representative from the Sacred Heart Church, who is here to provide their comments.
Hello, my name is James Hain. I live at 1784 East Shore Drive in Maplewood. I'm a fifth generation member of Sacred Heart Church in Dayton's Bluff. Religious freedom is very important in America. We have a growing parish. We have need of a multi-purpose building to serve for religious education, funeral lunches, and other parish events. This is a very important part of our Christian faith, to minister to people in times of grief, to train our children. It's important that we are allowed to continue doing this and to meet the needs of the parish with a new multi-purpose building. I know there's been some withdrawal of the proposals, proposal A, but this entire code adjustment, I'll call it code amendment, is very broad and unnecessarily so. I think that people should go back to the drawing board with this and start over. Thank you.
So just for clarification for us as the commissioners, sir, and for staff, when you say it's broad and you disagree with what portion exactly are you, could you give us an example of what you're referring to?
Sure. I think that the items listed, child adult daycare, art, music, dance, counseling. I think that those types of things are important ministries for us, and we would like to be able to continue, we would like to be able to continue offering those to our parishioners.
So, Bill, again, this is listing these items is continuing to allow what's already allowed, correct?
Okay, all right.
Correct. The list is a list of allowed uses, not a list of prohibited uses. It's a definition of religious accessory uses by making a list of examples.
And again, Bill, just to clarify again, could you just comment on why you mentioned earlier that the city did not, or a lot of cities do not have a definition for a religious institution, but we are sort of doing this now. Could you just clarify why we're doing this now?
Sure, and I'll correct myself. We actually do have a brief definition of religious institution in the code. I'll read it now. It says a church, chapel, synagogue, temple, or other similar place of worship, along with uses directly associated with the place of worship, such as a rectory, parsonage, convent, monastery, and religious retreat. Other cities often will just list the use, and I guess it falls back on the common definition of a church or religious institution when it's not specifically defined in the code. And in St. Paul, our history for it, I don't know that there's a specific reason why accessory uses haven't been defined in code, but they haven't. I don't know how to answer the question any better than that. I don't know of it coming up specifically where someone said we aren't going to define these in the code, planning commission or staff or anybody else. But it is the way it is.
But could you comment on why the city is taking this on now?
Oh, sure. Well, the short answer is we have a court order, and we also have a history of treating these like home occupations, which is a poor fit, to state it bluntly. Home occupations are expected to be, one person with one individual taking a piano lesson, or a CPA, or that sort of thing operating out of their house, which is clearly very different from what goes on commonly at religious institutions. So it's a poor fit that needs to be fixed. Plus, we have a court order to do so.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Turning over to Commissioner Riley.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a clarifying question for Mr. Derby, if I might, which is that new language regarding religious institution accessory uses. It says that they include the following, and there's a nice detailed list. I'm wondering if that is sort of include but are not limited to, if that's understood by that phrasing, or if that's not an accurate assumption. Thank you.
Chair, Commissioner Riley, I think that is an accurate assumption, but it also could use clarification. In fact, we got a letter suggesting that very thing this morning before the hearing, that be clarified to not be an exhaustive list. So that's something you may want to consider when you make a recommendation.
All right. Any additional questions for the representative from the Heart Church? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to Mr. David Menike. Mr. Menike, I think you're muted if you're trying to speak.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. My name is David Menike. I live at 1292 Marshall Avenue in St. Paul, and I'm also a faculty member at Concordia University in St. Paul, which is a signatory to a letter which has gone in. Yeah, my concern, I was appreciated that there is code language in the description of religious institutions, as you described, so that helps to understand. I'm not sure if that code language would include, schools or universities that are related to a church, like St. Thomas or Concordia University or public schools. So that's a question that I have. And then my understanding then is that you're planning on, the plan is to not include this list of accessory uses that's going to be omitted from the proposed amendments of things that would be not permitted to be zoned. So those are my two questions. Clarity on the religious institutions, what that covers, and am I correct in what you had said that those accessory uses will be eliminated from this proposed amendment of exclusions for zoning permits?
So I believe, Mr. Menike, that what is currently being proposed 1 through 5 is sort of a clarification of what is would be allowed by right, and it's probably just a codification of what's already allowed. The way I understood it was the purpose was,
yeah.
But I'll turn over to Mr. Dermody for any correction.
Yes, again, this list of uses is intended to be permitted uses, not prohibited uses. And what is off the table is struck on the screen there, and that's a standard that had gone out for public comment that will not go forward. And that was a prohibition on building additions or new buildings for the primary purpose of an accessory use. Everything else, that list of uses 1 through 5 is a list of uses that's proposed to be allowed, not the other way around.
And so when something, just to comment on, when speakers are saying that the language seems really broad, I believe staff is doing that intentionally out of respect for the various uses within a religious institution that would fall within these categories. It's my understanding of it, Mr. Menike.
Okay.
What was your second question, sir? See if I can post it for staff.
Yeah, the descriptions of religious institutions, does that include schools and universities that are affiliated with a religious institution?
Bill, would that fall under general education classes?
It would not fall under religious institution. I don't think it would fall under education, whether it's college, university, or K through 12 school or whatever. We have another definition that would be a better fit for those uses. They happen to be allowed in pretty much the same places. So I don't know how much difference it makes, but we have education of various types defined in the code. And I think that's where those uses would fall.
Is there any additional comment, Mr. Menike?
No.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll turn over to staff. I'm sorry, to commissioners for any additional questions. Seeing none, I'll turn over to Mr. Brian Alton. Mr. Alton, if you could unmute yourself, state your name and address for the record, and then you have 3 minutes, sir.
Chair Rangel Morales and members of the Planning Commission, thank you for your time and attention to this matter. My name is Brian Alton. I am speaking on behalf of Interfaith Action of Greater St. Paul. Also on the call today is Randy Roth, who is the Executive Director. My address is 951 Grand Avenue. On behalf of Interfaith Action and its nearly 100 faith community members in the East Metro area, we have some specific comments regarding the proposed changes. The proposed ordinance is divided into 2 parts, the definition of uses and then the standards and conditions. First, we want to make sure, and this has been touched on, that any non-conforming uses would be allowed to continue. So for example, if a church or a synagogue is using a facility in a way that isn't listed on these accessory uses that presently, that would be allowed to continue. Secondly, the list of accessory uses should be modified. One of our suggestions has been touched on that the first sentence should say that this is uses that are examples, and so it's not limited to these, because we understand that the intention of this is to be permissive and not restrictive. One concern is that there is a mention of something called social and community services, and that's not defined. We think that there should be some objective definition of that, so that it's clear what social community services is. The third thing is in the number 4, where there's a limitation of 10 adults in emergency and overnight shelters. Interfaith Action operates Project Home, and it has done that for many, many years, as you commissioners are aware, in churches and synagogues throughout the city of St. Paul. And it's very possible that 10 is too restrictive. We would suggest that number be raised. 25 is a potential number that would, I think, be acceptable. Also, I think that the definition of accessory uses could include accessory dwelling units. Religious institutions who have a desire to directly address the lack of affordable housing and the great need for stable housing for those most in need may wish to use this flexible zoning option or housing option. So we think you should consider adding ADUs as an accessory use if it otherwise complies with the zoning code and the building code. Then the definition of food shelf is there. That's already in the zoning code where there's a definition of accessory uses. So I think it should be clear that the accessory uses that are defined in section 65910 should be continue to be used. I'll briefly wrap up. Thank you for deleting the new building standard and condition. The 1,000 square feet restriction is too small. I don't have a proposed number, but it's not large enough. And then we would also ask that religious institutions be allowed to have a lesser fee if they need to comply with the CUP or get a CUP in order to comply with the ordinance. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Alton, can you just say that last portion again? I didn't understand what you were saying.
Yeah, sorry, I'm speaking fast. I wanted to meet my 3-minute limit.
Sure.
We were asking that for a CUP fee that there be a lesser fee for religious institutions if they're required to file for a conditional use permit in order to comply with these zoning code amendments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Alton. Any questions for Mr. Alton? And sir, I appreciate actually the list that you provided and the way that you detailed it. It was actually really instructive of sort of what I guess is a lot of the concern here. So I appreciate those comments. And you're muted, sir. But I'll turn over to Commissioner Holst, who has his hand up.
Chair, actually, I was about to say what you were just going to say, that I find the list to be very helpful. In addition to that, if we could, and this would, I think, apply to any speaker today, if it would be helpful to at least get the specific items maybe sent in via writing, so that when it comes back to the Comprehensive Neighborhood Planning Committee, we can either consider adding them, depending upon how we handle this whole thing, but that might be a possibility that these get added. And so to see all of those would be helpful. And I guess I have a question for staff, because I think it might help to clarify a little bit. If we could just get maybe just real quick 1 or 2 examples of like what's permitted by right and what would require a planning commission type process.
Sure. Chair, Commissioner Holst, among the uses shown here, the ones that would require a conditional use permit are in residential districts, social and community services over 1,000 square feet. The other uses listed here would not require a conditional use permit under the proposal. That includes daycare, art, music, dance, education classes, after school programs, all of number 1, all of number 2, community center, etc. Counseling, so that part of number 3, all of number 4, and all of number 5 would not trigger the requirement for a conditional use permit under this proposal.
Okay, and just for clarity, that's only in residential districts. Any district that's sort of, I don't know, let's call it more intensive use, T1, B, industrial, it's always by right?
Well, social and community services are allowed in pretty much all of those districts by right anyway. And yes, there's no trigger within this for traditional neighborhood, business, or industrial districts for a conditional use permit at all, no matter what the use is.
Thank you.
Any additional question for staff? And Mr. Alton, I assume you submitted written comments as Commissioner Holst is. I would join Commissioner Holst, and I think it would be really helpful.
Yes, I did submit those last night. And I sent them to Sonia and Bill. So,
all right, thank you, sir. And we will get a copy of all of that, or we can request a copy of it if it hasn't been provided.
I can resubmit it as well.
You will get a copy, Chair. You will get a copy of everything that was submitted.
Yep, thank you, Bill. So thank you, Mr. Alton. I'll move on to the next individual. Roger Rabin. Sorry, sir, if I'm mispronouncing your name. You could unmute and state your name and address for the record?
Yes, my name is Roger Rabine. I'm an elected officer, vice president of Our Savior's Lutheran Church at 674 Johnson Parkway in St. Paul. I have submitted detailed comments to Mr. Dermody reflecting some concerns I have regarding clarity for how the proposed amendments could be either interpreted by religious institutions or enforced by the city. I do want to echo what Mr. Alton said about social and community services, and I understand that's for spaces 4,000 square feet, but as written, social and community services does not appear to be specifically defined. I could not find a definition for what is meant by social and community services. Social and community services that my church does and has done, at least in my opinion, I think their social and community services are using spaces within our building for community meals, spaces for community activities on National Night Out, giveaways of used goods to neighborhood residents, food giveaways, food shelves to neighborhood residents, after school programs, meetings for scoutings. We've offered our building as a polling place on election day. We've offered our space for city-sponsored meeting to explain proposed construction projects done by the city of St. Paul. It seems to me, as written, these activities could all be affected by the proposed changes or the lack of definition for what is meant by social and community services. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for the speaker from commissioners? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next person. Mr. Tyler Giles.
Hi, my name is Tyler Giles. I'm an elected officer of City Life Church at 225 Cleveland Avenue South. I mostly echo what my predecessor said. I think that the central flaw of this, after item A has been struck, is that it seems to be a gratuitous inclusion of a laundry list of things that are allowed by right, which are redundant, and then where we require a cup, it's a black box by the eye of the beholder what constitutes a social and community service, or where I feel like the social and community services should be defined inclusively, rather than make it a mystery to faith institutions that are trying to plan for additional community services, or are what they are planning a community service or not. They don't know. Do they have to plan for cup risk? Do they have to plan for their neighbors interpreting the social community, what they're doing as a social community service that requires a cup? So we request that the commission clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giles, and I appreciate those comments. Any questions for Mr. Giles? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next individual. Gail Schiff.
Yes, thank you.
My name is Gail Schiff. I live at 1459 Payne Avenue in St. Paul. I have a church right on my corner. I have another church 3 blocks away. I'm a member of Sacred Heart Catholic Church in the Dayton's Bluff area. And I think that for those of us that live in St. Paul, you really can't go 4 or 5 blocks without coming into some kind of religious institution. And that's a wonderful thing for our city. It really is. I understand the dilemma of trying to meet this court order, but I think that maybe a different approach might be helpful in that rather than focusing on the essential or advisory uses of the church, maybe shift the focus on how that organization is going to meet the needs of their church without interfering with the needs of the neighborhood and the flow of traffic and the flow of people. Because it seems like that's what started this whole thing. So maybe by going back and revisiting how a church would meet those needs without disrupting the neighborhood. Many churches can do that already because they have ample parking or they're situated on a main thoroughfare. Some of them, such as the one in my neighborhood, is a smaller church. And when church is on, there's a limited parking on the street, but it all works in my little neighborhood here. So maybe that is a different approach, and we could go back and revisit the court order using something like this rather than what each individual entity is doing within the walls of their organization. Thank you. I have nothing more.
Thank you, Ms. Schiff. Is there any questions for Ms. Schiff? All right, we'll move on to the next speaker. And it's Corin.
Yes, Corinne Wendell. I am a resident of St. Paul at 1350 Como Boulevard East. Also a member of Fairmount Avenue United Methodist Church down by McAllister. And then also a planner myself who looks at zoning codes all the time. So I wanted to take a moment just to, and I had submitted comments to Mr. Demoody already this morning, but wanted to comment on the structure. I do feel like similar to Gail, in that what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to prevent from happening as the kind of key question? I do feel that this could be handled in the definition section alone for religious institution instead of going out into accessory uses. And then also putting those in your table below. It seems a little excessive to have to translate that language and a little more confusing than you'd want it to be. Also, just to mention that the CUP process for churches, I don't think you're actually streamlining it for them or making it easier. They would have to go through a laborious process to submit a conditional use permit for the social and community services for their church. The church activities happen all over church campuses, like from wall to wall. Our church is small on a corner in a neighborhood, and all of our needs are met there. The parking is met. I think the church was there before the neighborhood arrived. So, I think everyone has learned to kind of have a flexibility with churches in neighborhoods, especially in residential districts, and they are a welcomed use in those areas. And so I also think 1,000-foot restriction, once you start restricting the spaces, I think that also gets confusing for folks because what works for someone doesn't work for another. And so we want to make sure we can be as flexible as possible. And so that's all the comments I have. Thank you, commissioners, for taking the time to listen this morning.
Thank you, ma'am. And that buzzer going off was from the last speaker. So any questions for the speaker? All right, so I'll move on to the next individual, Father Gifford.
Yes, and Father Joseph Gifford at 375 Oxford Street North, St. Paul. And I'm the parochial administrator in charge of the Church of St. Peter Claver in St. Paul. And we strongly oppose this proposed amendment, especially that which is already struck A. It is, the rest of it, including B, is overly broad and restrictive to the point of harming the public and the common good. The city should not be making a determination for us as to what is primary and what is accessory to our religious practice. Our scriptures tell us time and again that we need to share God's love by caring for others, especially the sick, the elderly, the poor, and those on the margins of society. This care for others, along with the worship of God, is primary for our religious practice. This proposed amendment would also further disenfranchise the minority groups in St. Paul, especially those that rely on the accessory care given by religious institutions that the city is unable to provide on its own. A senior care facility at our church, St. Peter Claver, is the perfect example. We have been working towards building one for years. It would not only help bring stability to the already oppressed Rondo community, but it would also help to further the advancement of our community through providing more jobs in our neighborhood, which were taken from us when I-94 was put in. And it would provide affordable housing for our Black seniors to be able to stay in their neighborhood instead of being forced to move out of the area when they can no longer live on their own. This proposed amendment could easily be seen as just another way for the government to once again marginalize and suppress minorities. We at St. Peter Claver Church have worked diligently to not only provide a place for Black Catholics to worship, but also to serve our neighbors in Rondo. St. Peter Claver has 4 buildings: the main church building, the rectory office, spirituality center, and the St. Peter Claver School building. Under this new proposed code, we would be restricted in building a gym for our school, new rectory, new convent, new office buildings, or that new senior care facility. In the end, if these proposed amendments are passed as they are, then the city would be stunting our growth and forcing us to eventually close our school, which has been a staple of Rondo and has provided an opportunity to close the ever-widening racial education gap. It would also cut off any opportunity for us to build that senior care facility. If these amendments pass, the city of St. Paul will kill this pillar of the Black community in Minneapolis, which has stood for almost 130 years. This amendment should not be passed. Please do what you can to see our religious institutions as partners in public service, not competitors. Thank you.
Quick question, Father Gifford, are you referring to, are you classifying that addition as a falling within a social or community service?
The senior facility definitely could, and it would be restricted by the standards and conditions B.
1,000 square feet, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. And I think I'm not going to put staff on, without giving them an opportunity to address that question completely, but I do think it exemplifies what other speakers have commented on about perhaps providing a better definition of what is meant by community area, or just additional clarification on that. Any additional questions for Father Gifford? All right, thank you, sir, for your comments today. Moving on to Mr. Ethan Roberts.
Good morning. My name is Ethan Roberts, and I am the Director of Government Affairs for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. So in that capacity, this morning, I'm representing the St. Paul Jewish Federation and the synagogues of St. Paul. I think this amendment needs to be withdrawn. I think there's just so many questions that are unanswered. It's honestly, I have a law degree from Stanford, and I'm very confused. And so maybe I just need more coffee, or maybe this document just needs some more clarity. So for example, counseling, social, and community services are allowed by right above, and then below you need to go through the CUP process through social and community services. I'm a lobbyist. I write laws. I don't understand that at all. It doesn't make any sense to me. If something's allowed by right and doesn't need to go through the cut process above, how could that same language below now require to go through the cut process? I understand, because I've been in contact with the attorney for the original plaintiff in the case which there's a settlement agreement for, but my understanding is there hasn't really been much contact with that plaintiff. And so it would seem to me if this is this amendment is required because of that litigation, should at least be talking to the plaintiff, let alone the other folks like, you know, Randy Ross organization. This is not something that was developed with us. This is something which is happening to us. And yet it comes from a successful litigation, frankly, against the city. And so this happens at the Capitol, and I'm sure it happens with the cities. We just need to take a step back. We need to pull this document, which is quite confusing, quite self-contradictory, and then actually work together to come up with something which can work for everyone, which is also compliant with federal law, required with our state constitution, and that everyone can feel good about. Trying to amend something meeting by meeting is not the best process. And I'm not quite sure, and I don't think a lot of us are quite sure what the urgency is. We should do this right. And again, maybe I haven't had my coffee, but if someone who is a Stanford lawyer can look at this document and not quite understand what this means, to not use a, I don't want to say that, I want to take the Lord's name in vain, but like, heaven help us, right? For everyone else who's going to have to look at this document and doesn't have the benefit of a law degree and try to figure out, where do I fit in this? And so on behalf of the JCRC and the Jewish community that I represent, and probably a lot of other people on this call, let's just pull this back. Let's sit down virtually, in person, whatever we think is safe, and try to figure out something that can work rather than trying to amend this in meeting by meeting. Thank you for your interest in our thoughts. Thanks.
So, Mr. Roberts, one, thank you for your comments, and two, I think what I appreciate if you can mute yourself, Mr. Roberts. There's an echo. There we go. Thank you, sir. I think you highlighted another important component, which is community engagement, which I know it's been a priority for the commission, at least since I've been serving. And so I appreciate those comments, and I hope staff takes them to heart. But there is one with regards to your comment about it being an accessory use and then subsequently being curtailed. It's my understanding, the way that I read it, just for clarification, and maybe Bill can correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, a community center under 1,000 feet would be allowed by right. Anything over 1,000 square feet would require a CUP. That type of sort of allowance and then limitation or somewhat of a CUP requirement is, I think, pretty common in various areas of the zoning code. So could you, I'm trying to understand where the confusion is. So if you could, I'm trying to understand your point. So
I think that would be helpful then, right? To add language which says, you know, for under 1,000 feet above, over 1,000 feet below. 1,000 feet, of course, is not very large. So I think that that's important. And something I mentioned in the previous call with just the Planning Commission staff, this is going to have a disparate impact on new faith communities or growing faith communities. And so if what you're saying is, well, if you're already in place over 1,000 feet, you're fine. But if you aren't yet online using that space over 1,000 feet, you're not necessarily. Well, who's that going to impact more? And so I think that at a time when we're all very concerned about equity, we should think about what the consequences of what something might seem as facially neutral will have in the real world. And so I do think that you potentially could have a disparate impact claim, just given the real world that we all live in, and who has buildings and who doesn't, who has all the space they need and who doesn't, right? Who's expanding and who doesn't. And I will say there are elements of the Jewish community which are quite mature. You know, Mount Zion has been there forever, right? Chabad is expanding. And so I Yeah, so that would help, that kind of clarification. But again, I think this 1,000 feet, it's a very arbitrary number, and it will have a disparate impact on growing faith communities, probably particularly faith communities of color.
I appreciate those comments, Mr. Robert.
Thank you.
I'll turn over to other commissioners for questions. All right, seeing none, I'll turn over then to Ms. Patricia Lowell.
Thank you. I'm Bishop Patricia Lowell of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the St. Paul Area Synod. I myself live at 2458 Como Avenue in St. Paul. Our synod offices are at 105 University Avenue West. Coming at this point in the public hearing, I want to say I will be submitting some revised comments because I've learned during the course of this hearing of some changes that are now underway. I want to thank the Commission for taking seriously a court order. That is an important part of how we work together as citizens. On the other hand, I think this is not the most helpful approach. In terms of a residential district, to put a parameter on social and community services without defining it is very tricky. The 1,000 square feet is very small in size, as others have said. More importantly, on religious land use, many of our houses of worship will come right back to say these are primary and essential parts of living out the faith of the community. I think it would be much better to acknowledge that there will not be a need for a conditional use permit, but that the building safety and fire codes cover capacity, cover that things are well done in both residential and other designated districts. I think it would be more helpful to move away from the home occupancy, occupation designation, because I think that got a funny path going several years ago when there was an issue with a congregation in Dayton's Bluff. I really thank you for your work, and as others have said, if the communion I serve, if we can be of help in community conversation, we welcome that opportunity. Thank you all for your good work.
Thank you, Ms. Lowell. Any questions for the speaker? All right, I'll turn then to Mr. Robert Grossman.
Appreciate you talking with all of us today. I am Robbie Grossman. I live at 1332 Murray Street in St. Paul. I'm here today as a volunteer for the St. Paul Area Association of Realtors. I serve on their board of directors. I'm also on their government affairs committee and their housing affordability task force. I want to thank you, Chairman Morales, and the rest of the commission here with the utmost respect. We appreciate your service to the community. I will let you know we have submitted a form of our concerns on this to Mr. Dermody. We had major concerns about the restrictions on the expansion and development, and I'm glad to hear that that has been struck from this agreement or from this ordinance. However, I do continue to hear some areas of concern on the side of these institutions who are also property owners. And as far as the St. Paul Area Association of Realtors, we find property owner rights to be of the utmost consideration and really should be weighed heavily when balancing it with any given codes from any municipality. In the aspect of religious institutions and their accessory uses, I think there is a heightened aspect of consequences of changes to these codes that not only affect the institution's property rights, but also really the intricate role they play in the communities that they serve. So therefore, we find it very crucial that these institutions should be very included in a process like this in terms of how it moves forward and how it will help them to serve the community to the best capacity they can. And I'll say, at a time when we're living in a pandemic, things are getting more expensive. There's underemployment, there's housing shortages, there's housing affordability issues. There's even some schools closing around the city of St. Paul. And there's even supply shortages that we're seeing that could get worse as time goes on here. And so I think the services that are provided by these institutions are extremely important. And it should be considered how a blanket policy could affect diverse communities, including the BIPOC communities that have been historically underserved in the Twin Cities. Those communities have different needs than maybe another community. And so I think blanket policies here can need to be very vetted out, and a lot of dialogue needs to happen. The communities of people in any city do have diverse needs, and we need that flexibility. And these institutions are also operating on tight margins, and adding more permit fees, that really does take money away from the people they are serving. I also just want everyone please to keep in mind that the city of St. Paul is trying to address the housing needs and housing affordability issue, and therefore there are more developments taking place here in St. Paul. There are some major developments like the Highland Bridge site or the Hillcrest development, River's Edge, which is being talked about. So with those projects, as you start bringing more people, not only more people, but more diverse populations into communities, flexibility is going to really be key for these property owners, these religious institution property owners. And they really are the boots on the ground that are closest to these communities. This policy, it needs to be done right. There are so many people that would be affected by the consequences of this. And I just from a very sincere place say this to you at the St. Paul Area Association of Realtors. We would love to help, try to come help the stakeholders here come to a consensus or give our input wherever it's germane. And I really implore you to put this on hold and give some more time to the stakeholders to get together with you at the table to find common ground, to be better educated, both from their end and your end, and understanding how their institutions work and the services that they provide. I think that's how you're going to come up with workable solutions with the least amount of collateral damage unintended to the community. So I appreciate you allowing me to speak today, and thank you for your service.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Grossman. Is there any questions from commissioners for the speaker? Thank you, sir. I'll turn then to the next individual, which is Joseph Coopers.
It's Kippers, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the St. Paul Planning Commission. My name is Joseph Kippers. My professional address is 777 Forest Street in St. Paul. It's on the east side of St. Paul. I'm the Chancellor for Civil Affairs for the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. And the Archdiocese oversees 27 Catholic parishes in the city of St. Paul. And we have numerous concerns regarding the proposed zoning ordinance, even as it's amended this morning. We do believe that the ordinance violates RLUIPA, which is the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which forbids local government from land use regulations that impose a substantial burden on religious exercise, unless the government can demonstrate that it is furthering a compelling interest through the least restrictive means possible. Our position is that to date, the city has not demonstrated that it has a compelling government interest at all through the least restrictive means, even with this revised ordinance. The city hasn't provided a clear policy justification for this proposed ordinance that really satisfies us, or I think many other people have already spoken and have not spoken yet this morning. Substantial portions of the revised ordinance are also overbroad and vague. In particular, which has been brought up by 6 prior speakers, the term social and community services. There's no definition for this term, which we've pretty much beaten to death. But if it stays in like it is, it's just going to lead to litigation and more problems without any type of definition. Another concern is that 1,000-foot restriction, which I think 5 people have talked about in section 5B of the proposed ordinance. Our position is that this is simply arbitrary and capricious. It's also very restrictive. A more reasonable ordinance should provide for something around, we feel, 4,000 square feet of floor area for community and social services, especially, whatever that term's going to mean at the end of the day. And then section 5C provides that, in quote, these standards and conditions will not be applied in a manner that constricts rights to religious exercise granted under RLUIPA, end quote. So our position is that all portions of this proposed ordinance, even as revised, restrict the ability of religious institutions to exercise their rights under RLUIPA. And there's no indication in the zoning ordinance, even as revised, who decides what the standards and conditions are that violate RLUIPA. So really what's going to happen here, and everyone should take note of this, is that this ordinance is just going to be a catalyst for really a lot of expensive and time-consuming litigation relating to the interpretation of RLUIPA as it applies to this ordinance. This is just ripe for litigation from beginning to end. So I'd like to conclude by saying that this does need to be rewritten, revised, starting from scratch with a clean sheet of paper. And the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis stands ready and willing to work with the city to come up with a fair and reasonable zoning code ordinance that doesn't unduly burden religious institutions as this one does currently. So thank you so much for your time. That's all I have this morning.
Thank you for that, Mr. Keepers. Is it?
Kippers. It's
Keepers.
Like an I. So the UE is like an I. It's Kippers.
I appreciate that, sir, and sorry for the mispronunciation.
Right.
So any questions for Mr. Keepers? So I'm just wondering, sir, are you disagreeing completely with the two remaining, or the one remaining sort of actual, like the restriction that's left after striking A?
Yes.
Okay, and what you're asking for is a better clarification of community like center, and then also the square footage you feel is too limiting.
Definitely the square footage is too limited, and I think 5 or 6 speakers already commented on that. It's clearly too small for what these churches in our 27 Catholic churches in St. Paul do. But we're not looking for a clarification of social and community services per se. We're saying, number one, that term is just so vague and overbroad, it shouldn't be used.
Okay. All right, any additional questions for Mr. Keeper? So I'm not seeing any. I'll look to see if there's anyone else that would like to comment that I haven't called on. There was an individual by the name of Cheryl who listed in comments some thoughts. Cheryl, are you still with us this morning? Okay. Did I call on, sorry, there was a lot of speakers this morning. Pastor Joshua Miller.
You did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just making sure that I get everybody that wrote on comments. And I believe that is everybody. So I will call, make a second call for anybody who would like to speak on this zoning study. And then I'll make a third call for anybody who would like to speak on the religious accessory use zoning study. With that said, then I will go ahead and well, I'll thank everybody from the public for attending today. To follow the Planning Commission's consideration of the public hearing testimony and final recommendations, you can find the information on the Planning Commission webpage. Obviously, it's the turnout and the comments will be duly considered by us as we deliberate how to move forward. I hope staff has taken diligent notes on sort of the overarching themes that have resonated this morning by individuals who took the time to speak. But then I will turn to Commissioner Host for a motion on how to move forward.
Chair, Could I jump in before you do that?
Go ahead, Mr. Dermody.
I'd like to jump in before you formally close the public hearing. I've been chatting with Director Pereira on this. We have a very tight timeline. We only have 2 weeks of slack, more or less, to be able to meet the court order on this. However, I'd recognize that we had a very helpful conversation that was facilitated by Interfaith Action a couple of weeks ago. And I might suggest that we use the limited amount of slack we have in the timeline. If Interfaith Action is so willing to host another event, and I'd like to ask their executive director, Randy Roth, if they'd be willing to do that in the late November timeframe, where we could bring a different set of recommendations from staff to that group before it goes to the subcommittee, the Planning Commission, on to the Planning Commission. I think that might be one way, really the only way that we have to reach large numbers of people and maintain this tight timeline that we're on. So with your permission, Chair, I'd like to ask that question to Ms. Roth.
Yes, Mr. Alton.
As Mr. Alton, who's our counsel, is queuing up, my name is Randy Roth. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Action of Greater St. Paul. My office address now is 1880 Randolph at the Provincial House in St. Paul, and we'd be happy to hold another forum.
And so I would just ask, there was a lot of different faiths, a lot of different individuals representing different institutions. I would just ask to see if it would be possible to reach out to them as well and see if they want to be part of that meeting and conversation. I think that we can definitely get to something that complies with what the city needs to do by the deadline and also meets the needs of what all these community members are sort of voicing concern over. So, Bill, would you be able to facilitate that with Ms. Roth and Mr. Alton?
Sure, absolutely. And if anyone wishes to join that, maybe Randy, you can put a contact in the chat that people can just use to sign up for whatever meeting we have. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. Dermody, I'd be happy to, but I'm embarrassed to say I'm not really sure how to use chat on Teams. And so if I could just say that my email address is rroth, R-R-O-T-H, at interfaithaction.org, O-R-G. Perhaps that's sufficient.
And so I'm wondering if someone from staff can write that email on the comment section if it's okay with Ms. Roth.
It's there.
Done. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So then, Bill, is there anything else you'd like to comment before I turn to Commissioner to a commissioner for closing the public comment?
No, thank you very much, Chair.
No, thank you, Bill. And again, thanks everybody for taking the time this morning to provide your comments. Commissioner Holst?
Yes, I'd move that we close the public comment and refer this back to the Comprehensive Neighborhood Planning Committee.
We would also be asking to keep the record open for written comments until Monday, November 1st. Is that okay, Commissioner Holst?
That is, yes.
Thank you. Is there a second on the motion?
Second by Dr. Mitchell.
All right. Motion by Commissioner Holst, seconded by Commissioner Mitchell. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none. Sonia, could we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Joy,
Yes.
Commissioner Grill,
Yes.
Commissioner Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner Holt,
Yes.
Commissioner Katner,
Yes.
Commissioner McMurtry, Commissioner McMurtry, Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Riley,
Commissioner Yang, if you could please mute yourself until they call on you. There's a lot of background noise.
Okay, one more time. Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Risberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Said,
Yes.
Commissioner Tagioff,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Underwood,
Yes.
Commissioner Yang,
Yes.
and Chair Rangel Morales,
Yes.
unanimous.
All right, so that motion carries. The matter will be, the public hearing will be closed. The public record will be kept open for written comments until November 1st, and then it will be referred back to the Comprehensive Planning Committee for additional deliberations. And hopefully by then, staff has had an opportunity to have further discussions with the community members. The next item on the agenda, let me bring up my agenda, would be zoning committee. I'll turn over to Commissioner Riley.
Thank you, Chair. All right. To start, well, the site plan review committee meeting agenda for next Tuesday, November 2nd, is an institutional building addition at 2206 Summit Avenue, which is the University of St. Thomas STEAM building. And then at 10:30, there will be a preliminary review for a multifamily residential building at 1096 James Avenue. And the note says that we can expect to see site plan review at the Planning Commission at a future date for that property. Then there are 4 items on the zoning committee agenda for next Thursday, November 4th. One is an application for an expansion of a non-conforming use permit to allow for the expansion of a non-conforming triplex to replace the existing rear exterior stairway with an enclosed stairway at 1680 Dayton, which is on Dayton between Aldine and Pierce. Second application is for a rezoning from R4 one family residential to RT2 townhouse at 83 Douglas Street, which is on Douglas between Harrison Avenue and Sturgis Street. There's an application to rezone from B2 community business to RM2 medium density multiple family residential at 1708 Selby, which is between Aldine and Herschel. And then the final application on our agenda next week is for a conditional use permit for an outdoor recycling processing center at 551 Barge Channel Road at Concord. So that's sort of the update. Then at our last zoning committee meeting, which took place on October 21st, our first item was old business, which was the application for a conditional use permit for 1179 East 7th Street. The conditional use permit was to convert the entire first floor of a commercial building to residential use, and a CUP is required every time more than 50% of a first floor of a building that has had a commercial use to be used as a residential use. One of the conditions from the staff recommendation was to retain the traditional storefront design whenever possible, as this building is near Heritage Preservation District and has been studied in the past, although is not part of any district, nor is it listed itself. The item was laid over at the previous zoning committee meeting to address a question from the committee regarding whether that requirement should be modified due to a potential substantial hardship or practical difficulties with complying with the condition associated with those traditional storefront design elements. Mr. Dermody's presented a staff memo dated October 15th, which is available on the website with additional information on the discussion he had with the applicant. Notably, page 2 of the memo details what the applicant said would be major hardships, including supply chain issues associated with securing appropriate windows and the added cost to redesign the interior of the first floor, which is also partially built out. The memo also includes a scenario for a different recommendation if the committee and ultimately the commission desires, notably that at least one storefront window opening face each street. Those streets are East 7th and Duluth, being retained rather than all the windows. Mr. Dermody stated that his staff recommendation from October 7th remains, which is to approve with a condition that all of the elements of the traditional storefront be retained. And a motion from Commissioner Grill was to adopt the revised recommendation from that memo dated October 15th, which requires some, but not all of the architectural details to be retained. That motion passed by a vote of 6-1. I was the no vote if anyone is interested in my rationale, but it's not particularly exciting. So that completes the old business from our meeting.
So the motion coming out of committee was to approve a conditional use permit for the 406 Maryland Avenue East, southeast corner of Maryland Avenue and Arkwright Street.
Chair Rangel Morales, sorry, it would be for 1179 East 7th Street. The Maryland item didn't come back to us. Yeah, that'll be back another time, I think.
No, that's on our meeting. 406 is the first on our agenda.
Oh, it is. Oh, yes, I wasn't here. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. I would defer to, I think, Commissioner Said if he's available on the first item of old business. I apologize.
Well, let's just do the 1179 East Street 7th Street TUP. So the motion coming out of that was a conditional use permit to convert the entire first floor of a commercial building to residential use. And that was approved 6-1 coming out of committee. That is the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, see none. Sonia, can we get a roll call, please?
Okay, Commissioner DeJoy?
Yes.
Commissioner Grill?
Yes.
Commissioner Hood?
Yes.
Commissioner Holt?
Yes.
Commissioner Kantner?
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell? Commissioner Mitchell? Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Commissioner Riley?
No.
I'm sorry, I'm here. This is Commissioner Mitchell. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Risberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Said?
Yes.
Commissioner Taggia?
Yes.
Commissioner Underwood? Commissioner Yang?
No.
10-2 to approve.
Thanks. So that motion does carry for a conditional use permit to convert the entire first floor of a commercial building to residential use at 1179 7th Street East. So Commissioner Riley, let's just finish up your next item and then I'll turn over to Commissioner Said.
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'm terribly sorry to be confused this morning. So the next item in new business was hearing about an application to rezone from RT1 two-family residential to RM1 low-density multiple family residential at a property at 1329 to 1331 Lincoln Avenue between Hamlin and Syndicate Avenues. The intent of the application was to allow for a third unit to be legally rented in a building originally constructed as a duplex. Unfortunately, the application runs up against a potential spot zoning situation, which requires a denial because spot zoning is illegal in Minnesota. Staff clarified the rationale for that denial, which is that the pattern of zoning and development on Lincoln Avenue from east to west is so strong that creating a multifamily district on a 40-foot lot would create an isolated use compared to what is immediately surrounding it. In addition, this lot is rather narrow and is not on an arterial street. The pattern references the zoning that is usually applied to narrow lots on local streets Although there may be a variety of other land uses and zoning districts in the area, that variety is not on local streets. We did have a conversation about whether the city's residential zoning code is perhaps too fine-grained, and I'm hopeful that that will come up in the future. But for this particular application, the motion out of committee is to recommend denial, and the vote was unanimous to rezone. So it was a recommendation to deny the rezoning from RT1 to family residential to RM1 low density multiple family residential at 1329 to 1331 Lincoln Avenue. And that completes my report. Happy to answer questions.
Right, so the motion coming out of committee was to deny the rezoning from RT1 to RM1 at 1329 at 1331 Lincoln. As any discussion on the motion, Commissioner Cantor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I looked over the staff recommendation in the report, and I do see the rationale that was used around spot zoning. However, I think there is an argument to be made that this is not spot zoning. So for those of you who might not know, spot zoning is basically a change in zoning to a very small area that is out of harmony with the comprehensive planning for the good of the community. And both the comprehensive plan, the 2040 St. Paul plan, and the McAllister Groveland community plan both support a triplex being included in the zoning for this block. In the comprehensive plan, the housing chapter specifically calls out the missing middle, which is basically the segment of the housing market that is small scale multifamily housing, compatible in scale with single family neighborhoods. And then the land use chapter identifies the area that this Lincoln addresses in as an urban neighborhood, which they say provides for medium density housing with a diversity of housing options. And I think, there's a legal test for whether something is spot zoning. And, there's three different factors. First is, does the requested use differ significantly from the prevailing land uses in the area? And I think here, kind of the distinction between the staff report and how I see it is how the area is defined. So sure, on Lincoln Avenue, except for a property just 2 houses down or 2 buildings down, there's only single family or duplexes. However, just north, just behind the property we're talking about is zoned RM2, which is multifamily, medium density, which is a step up from RM1, which is what the applicant is requesting. So I think if we don't just look at the street, but the area as a whole, I think it does not differ significantly from the prevailing land uses. Sorry. And then I think the area requested for rezoning, the second test for spot zoning is whether the area will benefit just a small number of landowners rather than hurting a larger percentage of landowners. And I think in this instance, not only do the owners of the Lincoln Avenue address stand to benefit from this being turned into a triplex, but so does the businesses in the neighborhood, the other residents of the neighborhood who could have more businesses to walk to, more transit services. So sorry, that was very long-winded, but I do think that there's an argument to be made that this rezoning should be supported, and I would make a motion if it's appropriate to recommend approval of the proposed rezoning.
So I believe Commissioner Cantor, well, 2 things. First, what you discussed was very heavily discussed during the committee meeting. Mr. Mike Richardson from staff sort of outlined why in staff's belief even despite the arguments I think you've mentioned, they continue to believe that Lincoln had developed differently than Grand Avenue, and so therefore they couldn't get to the recommendation that it wasn't spot zoning. As you could probably imagine, the idea of not allowing an additional unit to be used in the city was pretty contentious at the committee level. And so I know a lot of people who voted, myself included, sort of were struggling with that spot zoning issue. With regards to the motion, the current motion is to approve. If it doesn't get approved, then I think we would need to sort of finalize the process of why it's not being approved, and then I think we could turn to you for a motion and see if there's a second.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And I see Mr. Richardson has his hand up, so I'll turn over to Mr. Richardson. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Cantor, for asking those questions, I think, and bringing up those points. As the Chair said, there was a pretty long discussion about this at committee, and I just wanted to address a couple of the things that you said, Commissioner Cantor. From the City Attorney's Office, one of the definitions we got on spot zoning was similar to what you said, but that it applies to zoning changes typically limited to small plots of land which establish a use classification inconsistent with the surrounding uses and create an island of non-conforming use within a larger zone property. So that I could see that in addition to what you gave as well. And I think that is the primary issue, though, that the use classification allowing multifamily would be non-conforming within the pattern that exists there for the uses allowed by the other zoning districts surrounding. And then a couple of other things about the tests or factors that you brought up. I think thinking about how the area is defined in the staff report, this is, I think, potentially somewhat subjective, but at the same time, Grand Avenue is defined as a mixed-use corridor, definitely a different character than other residential streets. I think we were talking about Lincoln Avenue as compared to Goodrich directly south. There's an argument to be made that that is similar, and that those areas differ. So I'll put that out there for consideration. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention about the second test versus talking about benefiting a small number of landowners versus harming a larger number. I just want to remind the commissioners that while the impetus for this application was to allow a third unit in a basement, the application and the recommendation are in fact for the broader issue of a rezoning that will last for a very long time. And this building could be torn down and a different building constructed in the future. So if the question was just, is a third unit appropriate? The recommendation would likely be different, but that's not what the application was for. So I just want to bring up those points.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Any questions for staff? Okay, so the motion coming out of committee is to approve. The motion out of committee is to deny the rezone from RT1 to RM1 low density multifamily residential. Any additional discussion on the motion? So just to clarify, if you're voting in support of the motion, you would be voting to deny the rezoning. Sonia, could we get a roll call? Oh, sorry, let me call on Commissioner Risberg. Commissioner Risberg. You're muted, Jeff.
Sorry for the late entry here. Could you please remind me what the vote was on this item coming out of committee?
So I do believe it was unanimous for to deny the rezoning and be in favor of staff recommendation of given the spot zoning issue.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional questions? All right, Tanya, can we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner DeJoy,
Yes.
Commissioner Grill,
Yes.
Commissioner Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner Holst,
No.
Commissioner Pickner,
No.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Whistler,
Yes.
Commissioner Said,
Yes.
Commissioner Tagia,
Yes.
Commissioner Underwood,
Yes.
Commissioner Yang,
No.
10-3 to deny.
So that's 10-3 in favor of the motion to deny the rezoning. That motion carries. I'll turn over to Commissioner Said for the synopsis of 406 Maryland Fuel and Auto CUP. Commissioner Said, would you be able to do that? Or would you like me to? Commissioner Yang, if you could please mute yourself. There's still a lot of background noise.
Chair Commissioner Sayed, if you could, please.
Oh, you like me to do that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So there was a conditional use permit for an auto convenience market and auto service station at 406 Maryland Avenue East. The application requested conditional use permit approval for an auto convenience market and auto service station with the notion that the existing pumps and building would be replaced with new construction and the outdoor tire storage would be removed. Looking at the minutes, it looks like the motion was approved with various conditions. The conditions listed. Second. Was that, well, with the listed conditions, is that correct to staff, whoever made the presentation on it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
I'm saying, were the conditions listed in the staff report part of the approval?
Yes. Yes, and I believe this was laid over from last time because Commissioner Holst and perhaps others were interested in additional conditions.
Okay. So the motion was approved with conditions. Is there any discussion on the motion coming out of committee? Commissioner Holst?
So I'm not sure what the appropriate time would be. I mean, I have a motion to amend the conditions slightly that Mr. Dermody has already prepared, but I don't know if we want to do a motion and then I motion for an amendment or what the proper process here would be.
So, Mr. Dermody, perhaps you could provide a quick synopsis of what the current conditions are. So that what the current motion, Commissioner Holst, would be to approve as coming out of committee. If that doesn't pass, then we would be open to take a motion with an amended condition.
So, Chair and Commissioners, what I have up on the screen was actually a wording that Commissioner Holst is preparing to recommend, but it has underlines and crossouts, so you can see what the original motion coming out of committee was to approve the conditional use permit subject to one condition that says final plans approved by the zoning administrator for this use shall be in substantial compliance with the plans submitted and approved as part of this application, except that the trash enclosure shall be relocated to the southwest corner of the main building. That's it. That's the only condition. The And then the rest of this is if Mr. Holst wishes to make a motion. I believe this is his amended motion that he wishes to put forward, and it's up to you, Chair, on whether you want to entertain that.
Sure. So I guess the motion coming out of committee was to approve with the sole condition that Mr. Germany just read out. Commissioner Holst, I'll turn to you to articulate why you disagree with that. We'll then take a vote on the original motion coming out of committee. And if it doesn't carry, then we can turn to you for a motion on the amended language.
Very good. Thank you. Understood. Well, I can agree with the recommendation of the zoning committee regarding the auto convenience market as a conditional use. I note that the site plan was submitted with the application references a future tobacco product shop. Even though tobacco product shops are used that can be permitted in the zoning district, tobacco product shop at this site cannot be established without first obtaining a variance. The site is within half a mile of existing tobacco product shops, which other members of the Planning Commission had pointed out when we discussed this last week. Establishing a tobacco shop at this site would require a variance from the separation requirement. I believe is both probably premature and unnecessary to list on the site plan any future use of the property, especially use that would not be permitted at this time. I can support the recommendation, but think that the recommendation better serves the surrounding neighborhood if the reference in the site plan to a future use that is not allowed without a variance is stricken from the site plan as a condition approving this application. I can support the recommendation as well if an additional condition added that staff at PED or DSI both note in the city's Amanda records that the tobacco product shop is not permitted use at this site without first obtaining a variance because the site is too close to an existing tobacco product shop. I would therefore move that these two conditions, well, should the other motion fail, I would move these two conditions as amendments to the recommendation of the zoning committee, have prepared some additions to the findings that would support these amendments. So last week when I was having this, we were having this discussion, I was discussing whether or not we could put a conditional use permit on there that would just deny any future use of a tobacco shop. After discussions with Peter Warner, there was concern about whether or not that might possibly open the city to litigation. But these small changes would be okay. This really came from a problem that we had that came before the Planning Commission, quite frankly, just a few months ago, right? 444 Maryland Avenue, as we recall, was Zone B1. It was given a tobacco license, which it should not have been. And so then as a Planning Commission, we voted to move it from B1 to B2 because of an error. That allowed the tobacco use. The City Council then, as a result, overturned the Planning Commission, I believe on a unanimous vote, 7-0, not supporting the zoning, and now the city's being sued. That, in addition to the fact that it's just a problem for neighborhoods, and I think we've talked about the other tobacco stuff extensively. But this amendment will just put in enough little extra note to make sure that, you know, this isn't in the plan, so no one's under the idea that there should be a tobacco shop going in here, and sort of a double check for DSI or for zoning to make sure this doesn't happen. So my request would be that we, of my fellow planning commissioners, is that we turn down the initial recommendation coming out of zoning, and then we can move this recommendation with the slight changes that are on it.
And Commissioner Holst, I think you just raised your hand. So I assume
I did.
So Mr. Germany, just to clarify, if I remember this issue, for them, in order for this establishment to put a tobacco shop, they would have to come for some form of a variance, correct?
That's correct. Because of the separation requirement in the code, they cannot meet that separation requirement without first receiving a variance.
Okay. And Commissioner Holst, I think what you're saying is you would like to include language that sort of just codifies that or puts an exclamation point on it.
I think that'd be an accurate description, sort of belt and suspenders. My original thought had been, you know, let's throw a conditional use permit on there that says no tobacco. But again, Mr. Warner had suggested that might not be a litigation-free a possibility. So instead, we'll just sort of internally put an alert on there and make sure that the people that are building this building are very clear that, you know, the tobacco shop listed in the plans must be removed. I'll throw in one other comment. I really like this plan, right? I mean, it gets rid of a curb cut, it puts up a new building, it looks really nice, but the tobacco thing's a big problem. So.
All right, well, I'd certainly appreciate your diligence on this issue and in talking with staff and Mr. Warner and sort of further exploring it. So if we could, Mr. Dermody, could you put the Commissioner Holt's proposed language up?
Yes, I'll do that. Just a moment. So Commissioner Holt's proposal would amend findings 4C and 4E. It would reword condition 1 and add condition 2.
Okay. And so if you could just leave it up so that commissioners can go ahead and read that as they decide to vote whether or not yes or no on the motion coming out of committee. In the interim, I'll call on Commissioner DeJoy.
I'm not exactly clear. So there was concerns when we discussed this at the last meeting about it being a quasi judicial matter. So when we consulted our attorney, Peter Warner, what did he say? Did he say, yes, this is good and we should move forward, or this could could open us up to a lawsuit?
Commissioner House.
So through the chair, our attorney, Peter Warner, did not make a recommendation, but based off of what I described and what was important, he thought this would be good recommendation. And again, because this is quasi judicial, he doesn't make a recommendation, but he created something that he felt was would be reasonable and protect the city from liability based off of what I described.
So just to clarify though, that's if the language was to be included.
Correct.
This is the language that he would that he thought would be appropriate. Not
Correct.
appropriate, but that he can advise one way or the other, but that he would be sort of legally saying is permissible, not whether it's right or wrong.
Correct. That's an accurate statement, which was one of the reasons we held it over last week, was because we wanted to be able to consult with Peter Warner, and Peter Warner came up with language that would be acceptable. He's not recommending, right, because he can't, but he would say that this would be fine. So.
Okay. So again, the motion coming out of committee is to approve simply with the condition read by Mr. Dermody initially, with the understanding that if a tobacco shop or tobacco was to be sold on here, it would still need to go through the some form of variance request. In other words, some form of application process through the city. What Commissioner Holst is proposing is additional language that would sort of put an exclamation point bolded to the applicant that tobacco shop not a permitted use given the location unless it went through the formal process. Correct, Commissioner Holst?
That is my understanding. Yes, that is correct. So sort of the ultimate request from me would be denial of the first, and then we make a second motion with approval, and that'll allow everything to move forward and just puts just like you said, an exclamation point or some extra clarity around this.
So we'll take a motion first on the motion coming. We'll take a vote first on the motion coming out of committee, with it just to approve with the one condition. If you vote yes, you would be voting to essentially against the language by Commissioner Holst. If you vote no, then we'll turn over to Commissioner Holst to make a motion and see.
Correct. And the second motion, you know, is staff language also. I mean, I didn't write this thing freehand, right? This is you know, written by staff. So.
Okay. So Sonia, is there any additional discussion on the motion? Sonia, could we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner DeJoy?
Okay, I vote no, and my rationale is that there are other conditions that should be added.
Commissioner Grill? Commissioner Grill?
Yes.
Commissioner Hood?
No.
Commissioner Holst?
No, with finding, I think it was 4C.
Commissioner Kantner?
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell?
No.
Commissioner Moore?
No.
Commissioner Riley?
No.
Commissioner Risberg?
No.
Commissioner Said?
No.
Commissioner Tagia?
No.
Commissioner Underwood?
No.
Commissioner Yang?
No.
2 yes and 11 no.
All right, so that motion fails, but I'll turn over to Commissioner Holst.
Hello, I would move the motion that is before us now with the amendments presented by
All right,
Bill.
so the motion is for approval with the additional condition outlined and additional revised language for paragraph 4C. Is that correct?
So
Commissioner
moved.
Holst?
So moved.
All right, is there a second on the motion?
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Holst, seconded by Commissioner Said to approve,
Sorry, Chair. This Commissioner said that wasn't me.
approve the conditional use permit with the added language or change language on 4C, as noted on the screen, as well as the additional condition proposed by Commissioner Holst. Moved by Holst, seconded by Said. Is there any additional discussion on the motion?
Chair,
Chair.
this Commissioner said it wasn't me. Somebody else might be said a second.
Oh, I'm sorry, so Commissioner says, could I get the name of who seconded?
Oh yes, Commissioner Young.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Holst, seconded by Commissioner Yang. Any additional discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Sonia, can we get a roll call?
Commissioner DeJoy?
Yes.
Commissioner Grill?
Yes.
Commissioner Hood?
Yes.
Commissioner Holst?
Yes.
Commissioner Kantner?
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell?
Yes.
Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Commissioner Riley?
Yes, and I want to thank Commissioner Holst for bringing this up, and I feel like we've done ourselves good deed today. So thank you.
Commissioner Risberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Said?
Yes.
Commissioner Tagia?
Yes, and I second Commissioner Riley's comments.
Commissioner Underwood?
Yes.
Commissioner Yang?
Yes.
Unanimous.
All right, so that motion carries for approval of the CUP with the revised language and for CE and the additional conditions. So I will then turn to the next item on the agenda, which is the Comprehensive Neighborhood Planning Committee. I'll again turn to Commissioner Holst.
Comprehensive Neighborhood Planning Committee met and discussed the amendment to the St. Paul Neighborhood Redevelopment Plan. Project area include 520 Payne Avenue. Mr. Dermody, am I correct that you will be giving us a brief presentation on this?
I can. So the recommendation coming out of committee is to approve a revised redevelopment district, to recommend approval of revised redevelopment district that will allow a new TIF district to be set up for the property at 520 Payne Avenue. Many may remember that a rezoning came through to allow 62 units of affordable housing to be built on that site that was formerly zoned industrial. This action would essentially allow the tax increment financing to occur for the site. The committee did find that it is in conformance with the comprehensive plan, which is the only question in the Planning Commission's purview. I should note that other tax increment financing issues are not in part of the commission's recommendations, such as how the financing occurs, or any of those financial questions. The only question before the commission is whether the redevelopment plan as proposed is in conformance with the comprehensive plan. I see Director Pereira may have an addition or a correction to what I have stated.
Director Pereira.
Yes, Chair and Commissioners and Bill, thank you. No corrections from what Bill said, just to augment what you said. So to help with understanding kind of the role of the commission on this matter. In this case, we have the Housing Redevelopment Authority considering a variety of different actions at their November 10th meeting related to the financing of this housing project that's in question that would be within the new TIF district. And I can provide that information if there are concerns, but again, to reiterate what Bill said, the role of the commission here is just to see if the redevelopment plan as amended is consistent with the comprehensive plan, which is, I believe, what the committee did and recommended to the full planning commission today. So happy to share more information if we need to.
So just coming back to it real quick here then, I believe the vote was 5 or 6 in favor, 1 abstention, 1 opposed. I do think it's important to hear from people that were opposed. So if Dr. Yang wanted, I'd give him a moment to explain why he was opposed to this, if you want to do so.
Before turning to Commissioner Yang, Commissioner Kantner, I believe you were the one who was accused yourself from this matter, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. And I just wanted to state that I'll be recusing myself again today because my employer is working on the TIF documents for this.
And so then I'll turn over to Commissioner Yang.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Host. Thank you, directors. My concern is we are very close to November 10th. Just like Director Pereira said, I think those more detailed financial information will be available. Maybe it's out of our commission's purview, but as a broadly, the project, it has to fit the interest of the city in general. Even we are only, have purview over part of the process, but it's better for us to understand the overall fitness as well as financial healthy of this project. So I would move to delay our decision today until sometime later after November 10th.
I do believe that is the first motion, so I will entertain a second. Is there a second to delay? All right, not hearing a second, I do believe that that motion would die. I would then turn over for a new motion.
This is Commissioner Holst. So I'd move that we approve the amendment to the St. Paul Neighborhood Redevelopment Plan project to already incorporate 520 Payne Avenue redevelopment project, and that it complies with the comprehensive plan conformance.
So that's a motion by Commissioner Holst. Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Grill. I'll second the motion.
The motion by Commissioner Holst, seconded by Commissioner Grill, to approve the amendment to the St. Paul Neighborhood Redevelopment Plan to incorporate the 520 Payne Avenue redevelopment project.
as comprehensive plan conformance. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, Tanya, can we get a roll call?
Commissioner DeJoy,
Yes.
Commissioner Grill,
Yes.
Commissioner Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner Holt,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Risberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Said,
Yes.
Commissioner Taggia,
Yes.
Commissioner Underwood,
Yes.
Commissioner Yang,
No.
Chair Rangel Morales.
Yes.
Well, yes, 1 no, and 1 abstention.
All right, so that motion does carry. Commissioner Holst, is there any other updates you'd like to provide the commission?
Yeah, we canceled last week's comprehensive neighborhood planning committee, but we have scheduled on November 3rd. We will be relooking at the 1 to 4 unit housing infill.
All right, thank you for that, Commissioner Holst.
In addition, I guess this is Bill Dermody Day. It sounds like, at least based off the amount of business he's had to give today. So I appreciate you standing up and doing all this. I'm sure you feel like you've done a full day's work already, and it's only 10:50. So.
Thank you very much for holding the meeting. I'm so glad there was a quorum today. Thank you.
Mr. Dermody's just getting started with his day. So, the next item on the agenda is Transportation Committee. I'll turn over to Commissioner Risberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Our next meeting of the Transportation Committee will be November 1st, coming Monday, 4:30. We have 3 information items, again, pulled together by Mr. Dermody. He's also going to be busy on Monday. The first is the Curtis Street project. It's basically a sidewalk replacement project, and there'll be utility upgrades, water main replacement. The second is the Battle Creek Reclamation Project. This is a mill and overlay project, but it's currently developing new technology that's a little deeper mill and overlay. So this is kind of a trial project we'll learn about. And the last one will be phase 5 of the Wheelock Parkway project. And this is all part of the ground round implementation. So it's 5th in a series of projects on Wheelock Parkway to do a full street reconstruction. All 3 of those will be heard on Monday. And that concludes my report. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Risberg. Any questions for Commissioner Risberg? All right, I'll turn over to communications nominations. Is Commissioner Underwood still here? Luis, would you want to provide an update on?
Sure. Yes. We thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We met this morning. We have a brand new group of commissioners who have joined the Communications Nominations Committee. And there she is. If you want to jump in and continue the update, Commissioner Underwood. Just starting.
Yep. Sorry about that. Yes, it was really great to get together this morning. Thank you so much to our new committee members. And Luis just gave a great overview of the work that we do, and we dug into starting to talk about the openings that we have, which include wards 2, 4, 5, and 6. And so the city will start a marketing campaign today for these openings to encourage applications that will be due around November 24th. And so this is our first call to you, our existing commissioners, to encourage and recruit and share these opportunities. We are going to meet again in 2 weeks before the next planning commission to to further talk about recruiting efforts and to talk a little bit more about the end of year report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any questions for, I see Louise noted here what the vacancies are and in what wards. Any additional questions for nominations or communications? And thank you to the commissioners who joined that committee. I know it's a really important committee. Moving on to the next item on the agenda would be the task force liaison reports. I'll turn first to what appears to be the birthday girl of the day, Commissioner DeJoy. Commissioner DeJoy.
Sorry, I had my microphone on mute. Thank you for the birthday wishes. I'll keep my report brief. We did meet on October 19th, and our next meeting is November 16th. For our October meeting, we reviewed the whole master planning process and what comes next. As we start wrapping up the committee work, which we have another 2 meetings, one in November, one in December, then there's a review process for the advisory committee, the planning commission, the city council. There are other processes that will come into play. Let's see, there will be, let's see, a rezoning to allow for the master plan, zoning code amendments, comprehensive plan amendments, environmental review, and so on. So we meet on November, let's see, I want to see the timeline here in my notes. We're gonna, let's see, sorry.
It's November 16th.
November 16th, correct. And then, Bill, tell me what we're gonna do next. I'm not finding it in my notes.
Oh, sure. November
Oh, wait.
16th.
Go ahead.
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead if you've got notes.
Well, that we
Otherwise,
were going to review the policy parts, the maps and the text in November, and that we were going to provide a recommendation letter to the Planning Commission in December. And then the Planning Commission will review in January and hold public hearing around March, and then make recommendations in April. And then the City Council will hold a public hearing. So there's a lot of opportunity for public review and comment, and that's what's happening next. But we hope to wrap up the committee work by December. And Bill, if you want to add anything, please.
No, you caught it all. Thank you.
Okay.
Next item, sorry, Commissioner Grill.
This is Commissioner Grill. For the Riverview Station Area Planning Task Force, our November meeting has been canceled. And we will have our regularly scheduled meeting in December. I will have an agenda for that at a future meeting.
Okay. Any questions for either Commissioner DeJoy or Commissioner Grill? So moving on to old business, new business, or anything a commissioner would like to add to the agenda coming up in 2 weeks. With that will conclude the October 29th, 2021 St. Paul Planning Commission meeting. Thanks everybody for joining. I know it was a long meeting today, so I appreciate everybody staying to the end here. Everybody have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.